Hi, I'm Captain Falcon, and I'm here to tell you all about the greatest racing game in the world. And I should know, because I'm the greatest racer in the world. Well, one of the greatest racers in the world. I'm also the greatest bounty hunter in the galaxy. Well, one of the greatest bounty hunters in the galaxy. But either way, I'm definitely here to tell you about the greatest futuristic racer of them all. No, I'm not talking about Wipeout. Just shut up and watch the video already. It's November 1990. Nintendo is about to launch the SNES in Japan, joining the 16-bit era more than 7 years after the release of the NES. At this point, the Mega Drive has been around for over 2 years, and while it's not been a huge success in Japan, it has made a significant impression in the US. It's about to come out in Europe, where Sega have already won the 8-bit console war, though that counts for less in a region currently focused on the home computers, and is currently making the NES look a little creaky. The SNES, in other words, has something to prove. It has to prove that the NES wasn't a fluke, that Nintendo is still the company to beat, and it's got to do that with only 2 launch titles. One is a new entry in a beloved series, a game that will be feted for decades to come, wheeled out as one of the SNES's defining titles. That game is Super Mario World, a game which certainly doesn't need me to sing its praises. The other game is completely new, a technical marvel designed to show off the SNES's graphical capabilities, featuring pseudo 3D graphics of a smoothness and speed previously unseen in the home. This game will receive more mixed praise than its stablemate, because people are idiots. Still, FZero is an immediate success. The astonishing graphics, catchy music, and challenging gameplay are all arresting qualities. Plus, it's one of only 2 titles available, so it has something of a captive audience in early SNES adopters. And in its success, it secures its future, thus establishing Nintendo's second best series of games. So, what is FZero? Well, it's a futuristic racing game, that much is plain to see. It's not the first of its genre. Games like Powerdrome on the Atari ST and Stun Runner in the arcades had recently wowed the game's playing public, while variants on the genre had existed for years prior. For example, the 1983 ZX Spectrum classic Death Chase, a game subtly inspired by Return of the Jedi's speeder bikes. It is, however, by far the smoothest, most polished approach to that concept yet seen, fleshed out and fully consoleized. It features 3 5-race Grand Prix of escalating difficulty to complete, each race a 5-lap elimination job, with the requirement of placing at least 3rd by the end of the final lap to continue. There are 4 different craft to pilot, each with unique handling and, in the manual at least, their own associated character. Tracks are littered with boosters and jumps to take advantage of, plus your own 1 use per lap superjet to activate, allowing you to rocket through straights or plough straight through rough terrain that would drastically slow you otherwise, opening up shortcuts through tricky sections of track. The controls bear mentioning too. Though initially seeming much the same as the average racing game, there are a few quirks here. The thing is, you're in a hover vehicle, so aside from being able to steer left and right, you can also roll your ship to the left or right with the triggers, helping you to corner more effectively or jink across the track to avoid obstacles without changing your facing. And you can control your pitch when jumping, helping to control the distance and impact of your landing. It all adds to make the game feel considerably different from the other races of the time, rather than just a sci-fi skin. The sci-fi setting and hover vehicles also help each track to have its own distinct character, packed with unique features. Levels littered with hazards such as high winds or magnets pulling you off course, death-defying leaps, and even explosive mines to contend with. On top of that, each track has its own signature music which remains as catchy now as it ever was, something reflected by many of the songs recurring throughout the series. With its 15 tracks, 4 difficulty levels and 4 craft, the game offers a great deal of replayability, with its high-speed, high-risk racing necessitating careful learning of each track to ensure success. Despite being a launch title, FZero remains an attractive game now. Clear visuals and a real sense of speed have dulled the greatest cruelties of age, allowing it to stand the test of time. The lack of anything beyond the Grand Prix and practice modes does feel a little Spartan these days. The lack of any form of multiplayer in particular stings, but the game's simplicity actually feels quite refreshing in these days of ostentatious presentation and compulsive drip-feed unlock-heavy design. For a quick burst of racing action, FZero is still a beautiful game, and one that's easy to return to in every sense. Aside from the SNES original, the game has been re-released on Wii U and new Nintendo 3DS, giving modern players a portable option should they so fancy. Though if you really do want a portable version of the game, perhaps you should hold that thought. You see, there would be more pseudo 3D F-Zero games released than just the SNES entry. well, technically SNES entries. There were Japanese-only semi-sequels released on the SNES, but these are more curios than anything. Minor expansions released through Nintendo's early online service offered through the Japan-only Satellaview peripheral, which added extra craft and tracks along with audio commentary. No, beyond the SNES titles, Nintendo would release 3 Game Boy Advance titles based around the same sort of gameplay: Maximum Velocity, GP Legend, and Climax. The first game, 2001's Maximum Velocity, was released in Japan as simply F-Zero for Game Boy Advance, which makes it sound like a remake of the original game, and in some ways that's appropriate, but in others very much not. This is both the most and least traditional F-Zero game amongst all the sequels. In terms of setting, Maximum Velocity is unique. It's the only game in the series based at a different time, set 25 years after the original, and so offers a completely different set of characters and thus craft to pilot. It is, in fact, the only game in the entire series not to feature the original 4 craft and their associated pilots. On top of this, the game is made up almost entirely of brand new tracks, with only 2 returning from previous games. And yet, it's the most traditional of sequels mechanically, seeing the return of the exact same in-game mechanics as the then 11-year-old original, and has almost exactly the same structure, only now with a 4th Grand Prix unlockable by beating the previous 3 on expert difficulty. In this respect, it's the purest sequel to the original. It keeps the mechanics, improves the visuals slightly, adds new characters and tracks, expands the experience with unlockable elements, bungs it all into a portable experience, and in all is a perfect follow-up. It's one of my favourite handheld racing games of all time, and it's well worth a look even now. If you're a fan of the SNES game, Maximum Velocity is an easy recommendation. 2003's F-Zero GP Legend, on the other hand, is a little harder to recommend. This is a game which borrows liberally from different titles in the series. While maintaining the SNES-style pseudo 3D engine, it borrows mechanics which will be more familiar to players of the later games in the series, with a boost system tied into your ship's energy meter, and the ability to jink sideways to ram other craft. It's actually based on the barely known outside of Japan animated series, and so features a collection of story modes to go with the more traditional Grand Prix, as well as some, well, pretty horrible presentation. The story mode is actually quite interesting. Different missions with different targets, often set on unusually laid out tracks, and it certainly helps to pad out the experience. But the problem is, as well, the courses aren't great, and the handling is never quite as comfortable, quite as satisfying as the other games in the series. It's all just a bit underwhelming. And then there's 2004's Climax, which is, well, a bit of an oddity. A Japanese-only sequel to GP Legend using an only very slightly modified handling system. It swaps the story mode for a harder, simpler survival mode, presents the player with possibly the least satisfying Grand Prix selection in the series, which is then capped off by a drastically more challenging final cup as if to make up for it. The game is rendered more appealing by its built-in track editor, which is certainly a tempting draw, but in the end is still limited by the game's engine, and to be honest, the limitations of the track editor, and the way the AI handles user-created tracks, mean I always find myself wishing the game had simply had better tracks in the first place. And with that, the pseudo 3D F-Zero games come to an end, and indeed the series as a whole, as following Climax, the series would go on indefinite hiatus. A real shame that the last 2 games in the series were by far the worst. However, that's not the end of the story for us, as we haven't gotten to the jewels in F-Zero's crown, the polygonal entries in the series. FZero X was the 1998 N64 release in the series, and it's a doozy. Blisteringly fast, its relatively simple graphics for the system, low polygon models and basic textures abound, allow the N64 to maintain a stable frame rate even as the game allows 30 craft on the track at once, all shooting around at supersonic speeds. The game doesn't just use its new polygon-based engine to allow for impressive speed either. It takes the opportunity to move away from flat maps, with twisting, winding circuits that merrily see you racing along speedways that pitch through full 360-degree cycles, spending large portions of your time perpendicular, or even inversely oriented, to the ground below. Levels are packed with hills, tunnels and half-pipes, and it can all be wonderfully, bewilderingly disorientating to the newcomer. Content-wise, X is a massive step up too. Those 30 craft on screen are all unique, all pilotable, at least once you've unlocked them by beating the various cups in the game. Cups which move to a pure score-based system, allowing you to progress even if you come 30th on a track, though don't expect to win the cup if you do that. As for those cups, well, there are 3 to start with, expanding to 4 as you best them, then finally expanding into the X Cup, a cup made up of procedurally generated tracks giving unlimited replayability. Or at least that's the idea. It's fair to say that the X Cup can throw up some very interesting tracks that the AI itself can't always handle, which is always amusing to watch. Even so, it's an enjoyable aside and very satisfying to unlock. Mechanically speaking, X changes things a little. This is the game which first introduced a combined energy and boost meter to the series, forcing the player to choose whether to prioritise safety or to risk life and limb going hell for leather. Combined with a terrific sense of speed and a twisty course design, it makes for an exhilarating game, and a perfect retort to the up till then King of the Hill Wipeout 2097, which suddenly seemed sedate in comparison. It's still bloody great, mind. Split screen 4-player is also in, although it removes all the other competitors and looks even more basic than the standard game. Still, the trade-off is worth it. The gameplay is still ridiculously fast and smooth, astonishing considering the state of, well, pretty much every other split screen 4-player game on the N64. It may not be the most visually arresting game in the series, and its metal stylings, both visual and aural, may be a bit of an odd fit for a futuristic racer, but FZero X is the complete package. Many people would point to Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, or GoldenEye as being the N64's killer app. For me though, it's always going to be FZero X, the fastest, most exciting game on the system. But we're not quite done yet. Moving past the Japan-only track builder for FZero X, whose reliance on the similarly Japan-only N64DD peripheral makes it yet another tantalising, yet unavailable curio, we get to that final home console release of F-Zero. A release that builds on everything X set up, a release that completely gets what F-Zero is about, a release that wasn't developed by Nintendo. 2003's F-Zero GX, famously, was the first major collaboration between Sega and Nintendo, with Sega's Amusement division handling development duties. To say this raised a few eyebrows would be an understatement. While Nintendo's traditional rival had already developed games for the GameCube following their retirement from the console hardware business, actually developing games for Nintendo directly was an unprecedented step. It's worth noting here that the last two handheld games were also produced by third-party developers, having been handled by the now-defunct developer Suzak, but as lower-profile entries in the series, released after GX and produced by a minor developer rather than Nintendo's classic rival, this caused rather less of a stir. Sega developing games for Nintendo seemed like madness. Cats lying with dogs levels of apocalyptic foreshadowing. Surely it could only lead to disaster. Well, Amusement Vision knocked it for 6. They took everything F-Zero X had built, expanded upon it, then expanded some more, threw in some extra bells and whistles for good measure, and somehow never lost the essence of what makes F-Zero F-Zero. Once again, the game features 5 cups, again 3 initially available. It also features a story mode made up of a variety of missions with very different objectives, something the later GP Legend would borrow, and is notorious for its level of challenge once put up to the higher difficulty settings, which is necessary if you want to unlock everything. Indeed, there's a raft of unlockables. Aside from the last 2 cups, there are the 26 other craft to get through, the traditional 4 are unlocked at the start, plus a wide variety of ship components which allow you to build your own vehicle in the garage. A surprisingly fully featured mode which allows you to craft some very interesting, and very interesting, vehicles if you put your mind to it. There are even some particularly silly pilot profile videos to unlock for every character because, well, why not? But none of that would matter if the mechanics didn't hold up. GP Legend and Climax both demonstrate amply that a satisfying structure isn't enough without some strong core gameplay. So it's just as well that the gameplay is tuned to perfection. You're never let down by the controls, the racing is rubber banded just perfectly, never feeling unfair but doing a good job of keeping things interesting, with plenty of jostling for position. The air brakes and drifting feel just right. Where other games in the series punish you anytime you lose grip on the track, this is a game which rewards you for slingshotting around corners, encouraging you to push the limit on every turn. Everything about it feels good. But then perhaps this shouldn't be a surprise, what with the design being led by Toshihiro Nagoshi, celebrated creator of Daytona USA. If F-Zero X was exhilarating, then GX is whatever comes after that. Mega exhilarating or something. It takes the incredible sense of speed, the twisting, looping tracks of X, then applies Sega's arcade sensibilities to them. The relatively plain aesthetic of the series is replaced with personality-filled landscapes and brash colours. X's grungy metal stylings swap for an altogether more appropriate feeling presentation. Electronic noises a go-go and menus all shiny and chrome. Even the GameCube's quirky controller is used perfectly. The analog triggers and ridiculous button placement of the GameCube pad taken advantage of in rare manner, with GX comfortably the most comfortable of the F-Zero games to play. So that's F-Zero GX, the quirkiest, most fully featured, tightest game in the series. If it weren't for the final 2 GBA games, it would have been a fitting swan song for the series, but it'll just have to settle for being the satisfying climax to this video. Will Nintendo ever return to the series? I don't know. They certainly like to crib from it for their other series. Mario Kart 8's F-Zero DLC was well received even as a poor substitute for an actual F-Zero game, and Smash players have been thrilling to the sound of the Falcon Punch since 1999, and indeed fighting on classic F-Zero tracks since 2001. And let's not forget Captain Falcon's Twister Race minigame in Nintendo Land. But a full new game? Well, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. When even Metroid can't seem to catch a break, and with even the futuristic racing genres leading like Wipeout wiped out, F-Zero seems particularly unlikely to return. Oh well. Thanks for watching! I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if so, I hope you'll also look forward to the next games you should play, which will be arriving in a little earlier than usual. I'll be returning next week in order to tell you all about the most wonderful of synesthetic experiences, Rez. So if you've been eyeing up next Thursday's release of Rez Infinite for PS4, but aren't really sure what all the fuss is about, you might want to tune in. See you then!